In 1923, a German had to carry a wheelbarrow full of money just to buy a loaf of bread. The price of the same loaf could change from morning to evening. This was not a dystopia, it was real. But this video is not just about an inflation crisis that happened in the past. If you want to understand why the euro you hold in your wallet today is considered stable, and why the European Central Bank tries to keep inflation at exactly 2%, you need to go back to Germany a century ago. In this video, we will follow 5 questions. How did money lose its value? What lesson did Germans take from this crisis? Why did the Bundesbank create a different model of central banking? Why did Europe adopt this model? And why does the ECB have a 2% target today? Chapter 1. How did money lose its value? The story begins during the years of World War I. The German Empire suspended the gold standard to finance World War I and began borrowing. It tried to cover much of the cost of the war not through taxes, but through borrowing and printing money. Because it was so confident that it would win the war. Germany lost the war, and the country was now burdened with enormous debt. The Treaty of Versailles, signed in 1919, imposed a massive war reparations burden on Germany, 132 billion gold marks. Germany's foreign currency, gold reserves, and capacity to make external payments were severely limited. The government faced 2 choices: either raise taxes significantly and place this burden on the population, or print money and erode the debt. The government chose the riskier path of printing money without creating real value. From 1921 onward, the Reichsbank continued printing money. Prices began to rise. By 1923, things had become uncontrollable. France and Belgium occupied the Ruhr industrial region, arguing that Germany had delayed its reparations payments, further damaging economic production and public finances. Germany responded with passive resistance. It called on workers in the Ruhr to resist and continued paying the wages of workers who went on strike. But there was no real production to support these payments. In other words, the government printed the money directly. As a result, revenues declined while spending continued. Prices began changing not by the day, but by the hour. In restaurants, customers were paying for their meals before they even started eating, because by the time they finished, prices had already increased. The value of the mark was rapidly collapsing in international markets. In November 1923, $1 reached approximately 4.2 trillion paper marks. Money had completely lost its function as a store of value. People rushed to spend their wages as soon as they received them, because a few hours later, the purchasing power of that money could be almost zero. This was no longer normal inflation. In short, money collapsed because the state tried to cover a debt it could not afford to pay through money printing rather than production. Chapter 2. What lesson did Germans take from this crisis? Germany managed to emerge from the crisis. In November 1923, a new currency, the Rentenmark, was introduced into circulation. But the memory left by the crisis was far more lasting. Hyperinflation hit Germany's middle class extremely hard. Teachers, civil servants, and small business owners who had been living securely on their savings became impoverished almost overnight. This economic trauma was not merely a statistic, it became an experience deeply embedded in the collective memory. German public opinion surveys have repeatedly shown that Germans are significantly more sensitive to inflation compared with other European populations. The lesson that emerged from this collective memory was clear: political control over money creation is dangerous. If a government attempts to use the central bank for short-term interests, such as financing a war, fulfilling election promises, or covering a budget deficit, the consequences can consume the entire society. Chapter 3. Why did the Bundesbank create a different model of central banking? Founded in 1957, the Deutsche Bundesbank adopted a structure unlike that of any other central bank in the world. It was designed as a central bank independent of government instructions. At the time, this was a radical decision. In many countries, central banks were subordinate to finance ministries or were required to follow government instructions. The Bundesbank, however, had autonomy protected by law, the government could not interfere with interest rate decisions or demand that money be printed. This made it an independent institution. The Bundesbank's fundamental philosophy was clear. The primary task of monetary policy was to preserve price stability. Growth, employment, and exchange rates were important, but they remained secondary. The Bundesbank's primary responsibility was to protect the value of money, period. This model worked. The Deutsche Mark became Europe's most stable and trusted currency. Germany was now growing with low inflation. The Bundesbank's message was this: the more independent a central bank is from politics, the better it can protect the value of money. Chapter 4: Why did Europe adopt this model? After World War II, European economic integration accelerated. Since there was no common European currency, European countries beginning in the 1970s established various monetary systems designed to keep their exchange rates tied to one another, first the currency snake, and then the European monetary system in 1979. But these systems had a common problem: some countries' currencies were constantly losing value, while others, especially the German mark, remained strong. In order to keep their own currencies stable against the mark, the central banks of other countries effectively had to follow the Bundesbank's interest rate policy. The Bundesbank's credibility had become important within the European monetary system. So why not have a common monetary policy? When European leaders began seriously discussing the idea of a common currency in 1988, the question on the table was, what model should the newly established common central bank be based on? The answer was right beside them. Germany had achieved the greatest success in fighting inflation and had built the most credible institutional structure. Germany sacrificed its valuable mark as the price of joining the monetary union, but in return, it succeeded in having its own central banking philosophy adopted across the continent. During the 1990s, the idea of European monetary union became concrete. The Maastricht Treaty established the legal foundation for the common European currency and the European Central Bank. The European Central Bank, established in 1998, was deliberately located in Frankfurt because, symbolically, it was inheriting the legacy of the Bundesbank. The ECB's core mission of maintaining price stability resulted in an institutional design strongly inspired by the Bundesbank's stability-focused model. The ECB's primary objective is to maintain price stability. It also has a responsibility to support growth and employment, but only as long as doing so does not undermine price stability. This system was not accidental. The ECB cannot take instructions from the governments of member states, and it cannot directly finance any government's budget deficit. This means making it a rule that what Germany did not do in 1923 is, by design, not allowed. Chapter 5: Why does the ECB have a 2% target today? Making price stability the fundamental philosophy was not enough, it also had to be defined with a concrete number. In 1998, the ECB defined price stability as inflation below 2% over the medium term. In 2003, this understanding was clarified as below but close to 2%. In 2021, the ECB changed its strategy and adopted a symmetric 2% inflation target over the medium term. In other words, the ECB's objective is not zero inflation. Because zero inflation means living very close to the risk of deflation. When prices begin to fall, people postpone spending, the economy slows down, and the real burden of debt increases. Why not 5 or 10%? Because the lesson, which is the exact opposite of 1923, is that the lower and more predictable inflation is, the more confidently people and businesses can plan for the future. So behind the euro you hold today is the story of a German who, a century ago, carried a wheelbarrow full of money. Closing. The important legacy of the social tragedy that took place in Germany almost a century ago may be this thought. Money is not merely a tool that people use to buy things. Money means trust. In another video, we saw that the Lydians invented money through the concept of trust. In other words, money was invented to establish trust. When that trust disappears, the numbers printed on a currency may no longer have any meaning. Germans experienced this dramatically in 1923. Today, when you talk about the ECB's 2% target, you are actually talking about 100 years of history, a trauma experienced by a society, and a system built to ensure that such a trauma is never experienced again. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to subscribe to the Stock Market Historian channel. We will continue discovering together the stories of stock markets that have shaped world history.